Welcome to the Essence of Liberty podcast. This is the horsemanship podcast where we discuss all things liberty to help you understand, connect, communicate, and play with your horse in a gentle, subtle, and force-free way. We'll get a bit nerdy about equine psychology and learning theory to understand the science behind it all. And we'll also dive into how to motivate your horse, ways to strengthen your relationship, solving those common problems, and how to use liberty as a way to build your horse up physically, mentally, and emotionally, all in half an hour or less. I'm Dr. Nadine Limblum, former equine veterinarian, and I'd like to invite you to join me on this journey as a student of the horse. One of the biggest roadblocks that I see that seem to prevent people from starting liberty with their horse is this notion or misconception that you need to convert to liberty, or you need to convert to positive reinforcement, and you need to abandon everything else that you're doing with your horse, and that if you start liberty, then everything needs to be liberty. Or if you start using food rewards, then you need to use food rewards all the time, and your horse is going to be expecting food rewards all the time, and that it's this big change that you need to make, that when you start with this type of training, it's going to change your entire equestrian lifestyle, and that suddenly your horse is going to have liberty and a choice in absolutely everything that you do with them. I got a message on Instagram the other day from a beautiful lady, and she was so sweet and she was so honest, and she said, I really want to join the academy, but I just don't feel ready to transition to liberty. Or like, she was doing a bit of working equitation. She loved trail riding with her horse. And she said, like, I love doing all these things and I really want to do liberty, but I just don't want to leave all that other stuff behind, because I feel the happiest when I'm like on a trail ride and I have all these, like, I want to compete in the future. I want to do some working equitation things. And I was reading the message and I was like, you know what? This sort of comes up a lot with that. It's almost this idea that you need to completely abandon everything else that you're doing and your future goals, and that if you start liberty, then you're not allowed to ride your horse anymore. And I'm here to tell you that that is absolutely, absolutely not true at all. You do not need to abandon anything that everything that you're already doing with your horse can stay absolutely the same, and you can start incorporating liberty and positive reinforcement training with food rewards as an additional activity, as a separate activity in addition to everything else that you already do. So you do not need to change anything that you are currently doing. The thing that may happen though is, because liberty is it's a way of working with horses. Like, you don't have those physical restraints anymore. You can't rely on pressure. You can't rely on sort of pushing the horse into doing things. Not when it's this type of liberty, where the horse actually does have the choice. So it challenges you to really understand what motivates your horse and how to communicate with them in a very, very specific way. And what will happen, most likely, is that it will weave its way into the other things that you are doing with your horse. It will better your way of communicating with your horse in all other aspects. And this type of liberty really requires an understanding of how your horse learns in order to be able to communicate effectively with him and teach him things at liberty. And the thing is, the way that your horse learns doesn't change, no matter what you are doing with your horse, whether you are picking up his feet, whether you are in an Olympic show jumping competition, whether you're out on a trail ride. Your horse is constantly learning in the same exact way as he would at liberty. So what you will find is that liberty will challenge you to really understand these concepts, and you will begin to apply similar concepts in other things that you're doing. That doesn't mean that you're going to then start using positive reinforcement with food rewards when you're in an Olympic show jumping competition, but the understanding that you gain from communicating with your horse in this way is going to influence just the way that you interact with them and the way that you are with them in different situations, because it's a general understanding of how horses think, learn, and experience the world. You may be thinking then, okay, so if I start liberty with my horse as an additional activity, liberty where your horse has a choice and he can say no, then it's understandable to question that, okay, well, if he can say no in this scenario, then will he start saying no in other scenarios? So if I start letting him say no at liberty, then what if I want to go on a trail ride and he doesn't want to go for a trail ride. What do I do then? Is he going to start to think that he can say no in every situation? And that goes the same for food rewards as well. I get the same questions like, okay, well, if I start using food rewards in Liberty, isn't he going to expect a treat for everything he does after that? Like you start paying him and he's like, well, I'm not working unless I get paid. So those are two really, really fair questions. But the thing is that horses are smart enough to understand different contexts. So it's very possible to have like liberty time and work time, and times when you're using food rewards and times when you're not, as long as you're really consistent in when you're using it and when you're not, and you make that really clear to your horse, then it's very possible. A really good example is the commonly used strategy with breeding stallions. And that strategy is to use a very specific halter, that is the breeding halter. And the stallion only wears that halter when it's time for breeding and not when it's any other time. And what happens is that the stallion begins to associate this halter with breeding. And when it's a different halter, it's not going to be any breeding. So I've seen this strategy applied, and literally when you come out with this halter, the stallion gets all excited and he knows already that it's time for breeding. But then when you come out with a different halter, he doesn't have that anticipation because he knows that this is not going to lead to breeding. Whereas if you are not consistent with something like that, and he thinks that maybe there's a chance that you're actually taking me out of the paddock for breeding, then you're going to have those behaviors weave its way into just general handling. And when you're catching, it's a really, really effective strategy. You use a specific halter for when it's time for breeding. And that's a good example for how you can have that division between breeding and not breeding, and relatedly, liberty and using food rewards and not. You just have to be really consistent with when you are using it when you're doing liberty and what the context is versus when you're not. So you can have a very clear start cue, for example, that you bring them into the arena and you have a word that you say or a body signal that you use that shows the horse that it's the start of the session, and then you can have a specific thing that you use at the end of the session. And if you're consistent with that, then your horse will begin to pick it up. However, creating that association can take a little bit of time in the beginning. So your horse may go through a little bit of a phase, for example, with the food rewards, where he gets a bit excited and he thinks it's time for training with food rewards in contexts when it isn't anything to do with food rewards. And in those situations, you just have to give him a pat and say, okay, that's nice, but we're not doing that right now, and then go on with whatever else that it is that you're doing. And that's where people generally go wrong, because they begin using food rewards and then the horse enters that beginning phase, which is so fair. Of course, he's going to be like, oh, are we doing this thing now, before he understands the division in the different contexts. But then they see that and then they think, oh no, I don't want this. I don't want him to be expecting a food reward all the time. And then they just stop using food rewards altogether. And that's the mistake there, because you have to get through that little part. You have to show your horse. He's not just going to innately understand it. You have to actually explain it to him. You have to show him, you have to train him that this is when we're using food rewards and this is when we're not. He's not just going to magically understand that. So don't make the mistake of giving up or quitting without actually teaching him. So spend the time being consistent, because consistency really is the biggest part of this. You just have to be consistent. If you start getting lenient and you start blurring the lines, like for example, if you go and catch your horse or you're tacking him up and he starts sniffing your pockets looking for a food reward, if you then give him a food reward because he was really cute, then you're starting to blur the lines. So if you want that division, if you don't want him to expect a food reward for everything that he does, then you have to create that division and you have to continue as you normally would. So think about everything that you're currently doing and how you're reinforcing different behaviors, and you have to make sure that that remains consistent. And it's not actually very difficult at all. You just have to continue on exactly how you're doing and just be really specific about when you're adding in liberty and the use of food rewards, and trying not to blur the lines between that. So I hope that helps to clear things up a little bit, because there does seem to be a little bit of a misconception around that, in that when you start liberty, you have to transition completely into liberty and you have to quit riding your horse, and that everything you need to do from that point on has to be liberty based with food rewards and choice, etc. But Personally, I think that there's absolutely no problem with continuing doing exactly what you're doing and just adding liberty to as one of the activities that you do together as a way to build your relationship, refine your communication, understand each other better, and just have something fun to do that's a little bit different from your normal routine, because it can get a little bit stale when you're working towards something in particular. You're working towards a goal, you're trying to perfect different movements, or whatever else it is that you're doing. Liberty can be a really fun way just to reconnect, be with your horse, do something fun together, something that doesn't have a whole lot of pressure behind it as well. I mean, generally, when we're working towards a goal, whether it's competition or we're perfecting movements, etc., then there is a fair bit of pressure behind that, in that you want it to be like this and that you have to get it right by this particular time. Liberty, I mean, unless you're working towards a demonstration or performance or something like that, it should be really chill and no stress. Like that should be the core of liberty in itself, that it should just be fun, you're connecting, and the different exercises that you do together and the different things that you teach your horse through liberty is just something to talk about together. It's just a way to have something to do together in order to have something happening, an activity to keep your horse engaged and interested, and have something to sort of talk about. So that's it from me for this episode. This was a little bit of a shorter one, but I did just want to take an episode to talk about that topic. But other than that, I will see you in the next episode. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful time working with your horses and exploring the different possibilities of liberty, and I'll see you in the next episode.